Interesting. Well, I just wanted to, I think I've met most of the people on today, but I want to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Kim Temple, the broker with Redaway Realty here in Puerto Morelos. And I'm joined by our amazing teammates here, Keith Smith. Hi, Keith, in the beautiful blue, and Laura Perez, who probably shouldn't be here because she's sick, but she agreed to help us tonight. Thank you guys so much for being on. And I know our plan for tonight was kind of just do a quick market overview, and then there's Bruce in the background. Kind of a market overview of what's happening in the market, and then talk about the ways that foreigners can own property in Mexico. Now, we have kind of a mixed group and it's very small, so we can switch it up if you want. I mean, several of you on here have already purchased property. Some of you have already been through our buyer's masterclass. So I guess give me a little feedback on what you would like to do. I'm happy to go through the spiel. I'll definitely give you the market update, but do you want to hear all about ownership options tonight, or what are your thoughts?
I'd like to know how to own. My wife and I have been vacationing down there for about 10 years or so.
Okay.
And now we're both retired and we may be looking into something. We don't know yet.
Awesome. All right. And Jan too. Okay. Well, we'll just do the spiel then. The first thing I want to really talk about is kind of an overview of what's happened since we were last involved on Zoom. For the first time since 2019, we actually had a bit of a low season this summer. I guess to back up, from 2019 until probably July of this year, we had like the busiest time of Puerto Morelos history in terms of sales. It was,
Wow.
it was just on fire. There was no slowdown for COVID. In fact, it speeded, it went the other way. So, everyone was pretty overwhelmed. The systems that process sales were overwhelmed. They weren't staffed up enough. Everyone had cut staff because of COVID. And so there were a ton of sales in a very short time period and a very backlog system for getting those sales through. So sales went from taking like 30 to 40 days to more like 60 to 70 days, if not longer, just because the systems couldn't keep up. So it was great news if you were a seller in Puerto Morelos during that time period, because there just hasn't been much inventory, and that continues today. Although since COVID, we've seen a big increase in the building of projects here. So there's many pre-sale projects that we just didn't see before. A lot of investment in Puerto Morelos. A lot of people bought up land and now they're putting up condos. So if you're keeping an eye on the market, you're seeing a lot of those advertised, and mostly on the port side, but also in the Colonia and north and south of town. So we had a little slowdown this summer. I mean, sales didn't stop, but it slowed down a bit. We don't know if that's because interest rates went up in the US. We don't know if it's because there's really not much to sell. So it's hard to say what happened to slow things down. It's hard to pinpoint that, but all signs are pointing to that we're going to have a regular high season again, and we're having lots of interest in our properties. So, and there's not much already built. So it continues, I would say it really continues to be a seller's market in many respects. There's just not enough inventory for the interest in Puerto Morelos. Any questions about that summary? No. Oh, wait, I forgot. If you have been on here before, and many of you have, you know that Gabrielle makes a special cocktail for the for the Runaway Wednesdays, and he outdid himself. Well, he never does anything halfway. So this is, sorry, there's like a hair, gross. Yeah, sorry, my hair. It's like a mezcal and tonic and red berries and rosemary, and he even burned the rosemary. So cheers. I don't know if anyone else is having a cocktail, but this is quite good.
It's good to be loved.
Yeah, cheers, salute.
Here,
And it's a holiday,
He
you know,
looks
we're
festive.
into the holidays now. Yeah.
Yes.
So, thank you, Gabrielle.
we're just doing tequila.
Mhm. Nice.
I'm cooking dinner.
Mm. I never say that because I never cook.
Well, Mike Kim says the same thing because I always cook.
Nice. Okay, so that's kind of the summary of the market. And in terms of, I guess, you know, raise your hand if you've ever heard that foreigners can't own property in Mexico. I've certainly heard it, and people still ask me over and over whether that's the case. And yes, the answer is yes, foreigners can own property in Mexico. I'm not sure I'm not sure why it's taken so long for other people to understand that, because it really has been the case. I mean, foreigners have always been able to own property in most of Mexico. There is a restricted zone defined by the Mexican Constitution, which is, sorry, I get turned around. It's 50 kilometers from a sea border and 100 kilometers from a land border. And in that restricted zone, Mexico's Constitution says that foreigners can't own property there. And that made a lot of sense because Mexico was invaded a few times. So they have an interest in protecting their borders, which continues to this day. However, hello?
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So in the 1970s, the government decided, hey, we want to encourage foreign investment. Of course, they realized that their beaches are fantastic and that's where people are going to want to be. So they created a vehicle to allow foreign ownership, specifically only to allow foreign ownership. And that is an asset trust. And it's called a Fideicomiso. It's kind of a weird word, a long word, and the word actually only means trust. But in this context, we're talking about the Fideicomiso that's created to allow foreign ownership. Basically it's a legal fiction that they created to get around the prohibition of foreign ownership at the border and to build in some safeguards. And the safeguard that they built in was every trust by definition in most legal systems has to have a trustee, an administrator of the trust, and beneficiaries of the trust. Otherwise, you don't have a legal trust. In this case, Mexico said, hey, we're going to designate certain banks to be administrators of trusts, and then the buyer will be the beneficiary of the trust. The administrator of the trust, the trustee bank, has no rights to the property. They're merely a record keeper. They have a purely administrative function. They can't enter the property. They can't borrow against the property. It's not an asset of the bank, unlike when you have a mortgage. They can't loan against it. They can't kick you out. I mean, they have nothing to do with the actual land. And then the owner is a beneficiary. So usually it's a couple buying, you would be the primary beneficiaries of the trust. You would designate secondary beneficiaries when you open the trust. And the secondary beneficiaries are usually your heirs, oftentimes children. And so you go ahead and set all that up within the letter of the trust. The beauty of that is that when one primary beneficiary passes away, it goes to the other one. If both pass away, it goes to your heirs without ever having to go to probate court. This is all set up in the trust, in the legal document. And so there's a very smooth transition of property ownership upon death, which cannot be said for the probate court. So in that way, it's a real benefit to have a trust. Trusts by definition legally have to have a term. The term that they set for these is 50 years. And they're automatically renewable for another 50 years. The only reason they can ever decide not to renew your trust is if you've been convicted of a federal crime involving the land, in which case Mexico could also seize the property through due process. But that's the only instance that they could decline to renew your trust. Most people don't own their property that long. They would have sold it long before 50 years, but that's the length of the trust. Sorry, I have little notes here. So the trust is the trustee bank has less rights than, say, a mortgage lender. So like in the US and Canada, when you have a mortgage on your property, the lender has some rights to your property. You feel like they don't because your name is on the title, but they own the property until you pay it off, right? They can take that property back, they can seize it to satisfy the loan that they gave you. This is very different. The bank doesn't have any right ever to take the property. It's also very different from a lease, which is what many people confuse fideicomisos with. It's not a lease. Under a lease, which is a contract, the owner is giving you the right to use the contract under very specific terms and conditions, and the owner can pretty much cancel that at any time. They can evict you from the property. They can charge you. They make rules about how you can use the property. That's not at all what's happening with a fideicomiso. The bank is not telling you anything you can do with the property, except that they're going to tell you to follow the law. You can't break the law. They would like you not to break the law, and that it has to be for residential purposes, which does allow renting, but you're not supposed to have a commercial property in it. So just letting somebody else in. So the trust is, it sounds, I don't know, I don't want to use the term scary. People don't like the trust. It feels weird. They feel like maybe it isn't real ownership. And is it sketchy because we know the Constitution says no foreign ownership? And the answer to that is it's not sketchy. The government created it specifically to encourage you to buy land along their borders. And they've maintained it all of these years. There has been a movement since I've lived here about 10 years. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary. A few times it's come up that they want to just change the Constitution to get rid of that prohibition altogether. There's a real pushback to that, mostly from the banks because they're making money on the trust. So you pay the bank to set up the trust. You pay the bank if you have to extinguish the trust, meaning you sold your property to someone who doesn't need it. And you also pay them an annual fee every year. So they have a very big interest in keeping that prohibition in the Constitution so that they can continue to make money for, in many cases, not even sending you a bill every year. Like you have to remember when your bill is due, you have to contact them like 7 times to get them to let you pay your bill. So it's very frustrating.
How much is that bill?
Yeah, so they're all right around $500 right now, US. And the banks do the exact same thing. So there's really you don't need to run around picking a bank. We kind of just choose whoever's processing them in a good manner at the time that you buy. So there's really no difference in the banks.
Okay.
Hey, Kim, here's a silly question. Has a bank ever failed?
So there have been some banks that didn't fail, but they decided not to do fideicomisos anymore.
So what happens then?
In that case, it's just transferred to another bank, another designated the government designates who can do these fideicomisos, and it happened with Banamex decided not to do them anymore, and Banorte took over all their trusts. And so now the people just pay Banorte. They didn't have to go through a change of title or anything like that. It was just a substitution of the trustee. Yeah. But same thing, if a bank failed, it's not an asset of a bank, it's an administrative function. And the government has provided a safeguard that would go to another bank to do the administrative function. Any other questions about the trusts?
Could you say the word again? Fideicomiso?
Fideicomiso.
All right, I won't even attempt to spell it.
Yeah, it's Fideico. Oh, I'll put it in the chat too. Comiso. Let me find the chat.
Fideicomiso.
I got it, Kim.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the benefit of the trust is you can protect your heirs from having to deal with the Mexican probate court. It's a very smooth transition of property title. It's the way the government wants you to own the property. It's a safe way to own the property. The bummer about the trust is that it costs money. So it costs about $2,000 to either set up or transfer a trust. And it costs about $500 a year after that. And then if you sell to someone who doesn't need it, if you sell to a Mexican citizen, who are the only people who don't need a trust, then you'd have to pay to extinguish the trust, which is another $2,000. So they just make money no matter what.
If you sell to someone who needs the trust, let's say another US or Canadian expat, can you transfer the trust?
Mhm. So you can either transfer the trust, or, I mean, in some cases, you would go ahead and extinguish it and start a new one. The situations that I've had people do that are the original trust was getting near the end of it. And so they may just want to close that other one and start a new 50 years with a new trust instead of getting 10 years into it and have to redo it or something like that. Other than that, I mean, it used to be that the banks were not charging the same annual fees. So sometimes you would have people say, I don't want that trust that you have because you're paying $800 a year and I want to pay less. But now they've all kind of come in line. So it's very unusual that you would not transfer the trust. And it costs about the same. And it's actually faster than waiting to set up a new trust. If you're buying from a Mexican citizen, they won't have a trust. So or if it's a newly built property, it won't be it. You'll have to go ahead and apply with the government to set up the trust. And all that's taken care of by, we handle that with the closing team. So you're not actually having to do it. You just get to pay. The fun part. Any questions about that? All right, guys, very quiet. Keith, do you have anything to add? Am I covering the trust?
No, everything sounds great, Kim. The only thing I was thinking while you were chatting about it is if one of the banks here were to decide, like you said, Banamex decided not to service the Fideicomisos anymore, so they were transferred to Banorte. It just reminded me of a similar situation in the US when you have a mortgage with a certain lender, and oftentimes they sell off those mortgages in a block to another bank. And you get no advance notice. You just sort of get a letter from the lender saying, hey, so-and-so has your mortgage now, pay them instead of us. So it just seemed like kind of a similar situation to me.
Yeah, very much so. And you don't have to redo your title because they're just switching out the lender. Cool. So another way to own a property here as a foreigner is well, there's two other ways. One is that if you have a corporation in the US, your corporation can be the beneficiary of a trust. So you still, because you're not Mexican, you still have to have a trust, but your corporation can be a beneficiary of the trust. I don't know that makes a whole lot of sense unless you're multiple people buying a property together, in which case you might want to form a corporation in the US or wherever you are from. And then if there's changes in ownership, one person wants to buy out another person, you wouldn't have to go through the process in Mexico to do it. You could just do it in your home country, change out the shares. It doesn't affect the trust. And let me give you an example of why that's important. So we recently had a situation where two couples bought a home together. Didn't work with the realtor. So they just set up a trust with all of them on the trust. So you guys did that too, right? Lee, was she still here? So
yeah, there's 4 of us on ours.
yeah, there's 4 on yours, family, a little bit
Yeah.
different. So these were 2 unrelated couples. They had a falling out. One couple had to buy out the other couple, and because they had to do that, they triggered. It was a sale, so it triggered capital gains. It triggered purchase acquisition taxes. It was expensive. So if they had a little counseling before, they might have decided, I don't know if they might have decided to do a corporation. Sometimes that's easier, but there's tax reasons why you might not want to do that. So it's not something that I can say, do this or do that. You would need to talk to your attorney in Mexico and in the US and figure out what's the best way. But for multiple people, there are maybe different ways to structure it. And then your corporation is the beneficiary of the trust. The only bummer about that is if you do that, you lose, we haven't gotten to this yet, but there's an exemption from capital gains. that only is for people, not corporations. So you would lose the opportunity to take advantage of that partial exemption from capital gains. But I'll get to that in a little bit. The other way you can own property here, or people want to own property here, is a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll open a Mexican corporation and then I don't have to have a trust. And in fact, especially in Puerto Morelos, and probably other places, but I know here at a certain point in time, a lot of attorneys were advising people, don't open a trust, it's expensive, just open a corporation, I'll be on your corporation, I'll help you, blah, blah, blah. Well, it was never good advice, because the trust doesn't cost that much, and opening a corporation here does. The difference is the lawyer gets paid when you open a corporation and have to keep doing stuff every year for it, and they don't get paid when you do the trust. So I think it was a very self-serving advice.
And isn't there yearly filing fees on the corporation? or-
Every month you have to file taxes here. It
Right.
also, at least if you're a US citizen, you have to give notice to the US government that you're in a corporation. You have yearly meeting requirements that have to, we have to have a meeting, and that has to be filed with the public registry, which costs more than it should. So a little bit of money that they make you think you're saving in the front, you're not saving. You've opened up a whole can of worms. And the government has specifically said, do not farm a Mexican corporation to hold residential property. There may be some circumstances, let me let this person in. There may be some circumstances where it is appropriate for you to have a Mexican corporation. If you're buying a hotel, or you're going to, run a business out of the home. So, but that's a case-by-case basis. You would want to talk to an accountant and a lawyer here to see how to do that. Because it really is not as simple as filing something once a year here when you're a corporation. It's kind of convoluted. And I don't think it saves you anything. And then you lose the opportunity to use the partial exemption because it's a corporation. And the other thing that's happened is we've had a couple deals recently where people put their property in a corporation back in the day, put it to sleep, and now they want to sell it. And that requires a lot of money because now all the rules have changed. They have to reopen the corporation, file all the back assemblies, and get set up in the tax system. I mean, it's a closing that should have taken 40 days is going to take like 7 months because the tax people here are so backed up. So anyway, just don't open a corporation, Mexican corporation, unless you really, really need to. Any questions about corporations? No? Guys, while I'm thinking of it, in the chat, or I don't know, Laura, are you still here?
Yeah, I'm here.
Are you able to get all the names?
I think I have them all.
Okay, we're gonna do a little giveaway.
Let me know.
So Laura's writing down the names.
Okay, so I have Barb, Linda, Patrick,
Oops, you froze up.
Cindy, Greg, and Jan. Is that everyone? Keith, sorry, Keith, you're
You're not eligible, Keith.
Did you
Oh,
get
yeah.
Mindy? Did you get Mindy and I? Laura, did you get us? Mindy and Ira?
Yes, I did. Well, I have
Okay.
just Mindy. You guys are
That's
together.
okay. That's
Okay,
okay.
sounds good.
Okay,
All right,
we'll do that a little later.
sounds good.
You getting that beautiful apartment you bought?
No. You're getting a gift certificate to a restaurant.
We'll be
Because I
down-
know you're all coming to Puerto Morelos, right?
We're coming in a month.
January,
Yay,
Christmas week.
39 days, but who's counting?
yay. All right, so enough of the corporations. Now we know that you can own property here. The best way to own it is in the trust. It's not as bad as it sounds. And the other question I often get is, do you need any kind of visa to buy property in Mexico? And the answer is no. As long as you're in the country legally and can prove that, you are eligible to buy property here. And for many, many, many years, most people who bought, at least in Puerto Morelos, did not ever become any kind of visa holder in Mexico. They just, because you automatically got 180 days when you entered, they would be snowbirds, come for high season and then leave. They didn't have a need to change their status. Last year, there was a little scare when suddenly, and maybe independently, the Cancun immigration people at the airport started not giving people 180 days. And well, let me back up. There is a big push in all of Mexico to capture tax revenue that they haven't been good at capturing, because everything is really a cash. I mean, everything's cash under the table here. So they're really trying to throw a net over income. And they also are realizing that many people have properties here and they're making rental income that they're not paying taxes on. And many people are coming in the country. In fact, there's a huge number of expats who are here illegally. They've come in and overstayed a visa and just never left. So they really are trying to tighten up on that. And there may be some other political things going on. But anyway, the Cancun immigration guys said, hey, we're not, screw you guys. We're not giving you 180 days, especially if we think that you live here and you're just going in and out to get another 180 days. We want, if you're going to be living here, we want you to get either a temporary resident visa or a permanent resident visa. And that's not crazy. It just was a surprise when they started to do it. And there was kind of no rhyme or reason. It wasn't applied consistently. It wasn't, I think it was Cancun, and there might have been another airport, but it wasn't all over Mexico. Yeah. So it was very scary. And at the same time, they implemented a rule that everyone has to have a RFC, which is a Mexican tax ID number. And true to form, they implemented the rule without waiting until their tax service could process the demand.
Government's government.
So now there's a flood of people trying to get tax ID numbers, and the SAT is the name of our IRS here. They can't handle it. So it's become the same old thing where you can pay extra to try to get to the front of the line, or you wait many, many months for your tax ID number. Now, Keith, I have to ask you this. You don't have to have it. Is it just visa holders that have to have the tax ID number? I think that's the case.
As opposed to people that are here on a tourist visa, you
Yeah.
mean? Yeah, I think it's just visa holders. If you're
Or
just here on
homeowners.
if
Or
you're here on a 180-day tourist visa, then you don't have to. But as you were saying, right now they're back to giving out 180 days, kind of no questions asked, but there's no guarantee that that's going to be the case 6 months from now.
So if you're planning to be here, I mean, this is a little bit separate from buying a property. If you're planning to stay longer than 6 months in a year, you probably just need to go ahead and try to get temporary resident visa status or permanent resident visa status.
What about dual citizenship?
You couldn't get dual citizenship in the US, and I don't know what Canada's rule is. To get citizenship though, that's a very different thing. So these are just visa statuses that don't affect your citizenship anywhere else. If you want to apply for Mexican citizenship, you have to be here for 8 years, I think. And there's a test, and yeah, it's not, you don't just get citizenship. So permanent resident visa status gets you don't have to keep renewing your visa every year, which is nice. You get some discounts, but it's not citizenship. So
how difficult is it to get, bureaucratically speaking?
To get what?
A residency visa?
It's not that difficult. I mean, the difficulty right now is everybody wants one, and all of the consulates, you have to start in your country. So if you're from the US, you have to start in your state consulate, your Mexican consulate in your state, and they are overrun. And so I think the waiting times are pretty long for that. I don't know. I mean, there's some people on this call who've gotten theirs recently, probably. No?
Can you hear me, Kim?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, so I'm Barb. Husband and I got ours. We're from Canada. So as Kim says, you apply the country you're living in. For people in the States, you've got many more consulates to go to, and they will take you from different parts. But in Canada, we were from British Columbia, so we had to go to Vancouver. The requirements are up on the website, what you require for temporary and permanent, and they are going up 20% January the 1st. So it's getting, more and more expensive, if you like. It's not as it seemed to be a lot easier a few years ago, but now it's all going up again. But we called, applied, got all the paperwork, went down to the consulate in August, and we were here 4 weeks later. I'm very happy too.
And do you have to have a mailing address already in
No.
or residency?
It's interesting. When we went to the Vancouver consulate for ours, we were asked what airport we were flying into, and we said Cancun. And we were actually asked where in Quintana Roo we were going to be living. So we just said Puerto Morelos. But no, they just wanted to know what airport we were flying into with no actual address. We didn't have to give them an address. So it was easy.
You go onto YouTube and you search for all these amazing runaway realty YouTube videos. A lot of really good, interesting watching. Millie, what's Millie's last name again?
Arceo?
Arceo, thank you. She did back in, I think, January or February, a really, really, really useful session for the Runaway Realty team about the permanent residency, temporary residency. So any of you've got any questions about it, I really encourage you to go onto YouTube and search that, because it's an invaluable bunch of information. She's one of the people down here that helps guide people through the residency process. You don't need to use someone like that, but it does go quicker and smoother if you do, particularly if you're not fluent in Spanish.
Yeah, she's great, Millie Arceo, and actually we're gonna have her again this season. We're just trying to work out the date, but yeah. So, she can talk about the income requirements. I'm not up to date on that. And honestly, it seems to change per, the person that you meet with. Like, it's doesn't seem very consistent, and some consulates are more difficult than others in the US at least.
Will it save us the line? Can we go through the Mexican line at the citizen line at the airport?
Yes, I love that. Yes, yeah. Big benefit.
That's an incentive, yeah.
Well, since it's around the corner from my office, maybe I'll just go file.
Yeah, so our advice is that, I would, if you're gonna buy property here, whether you're planning on living here full time or not, I would try to get permanent resident visa status right away, just as soon as you can, as soon as you qualify for it. And that is because when you sell your property, I alluded to this partial exemption from capital gains taxes earlier. If you are a permanent resident visa holder who's held for more than 3 years and you have a tax ID number, which appears on your electric bill, it's kind of complicated, but the first thing you need is a permanent resident visa. You don't have to have been a permanent resident visa the whole time to count the 3 years of ownership, but you need to have it by closing day to qualify for that partial exemption. So it's really in your best interest. It's a big one. It exempts about up to almost around 200,000 US dollars of gain. So it can wipe out your capital gain. So you want to get that done as soon as possible. Any questions about that? So no visa. You don't need a visa, but you do need, guess what? Cash. Our market is an all cash market, meaning that we're not carrying bundles of cash in, although they used to do that. There are no lenders in Mexico or in other places offering traditional mortgage loans using these properties as collateral for the loan. And the reason for that is that it is very difficult to repossess property under Mexican real estate law. So lenders are not willing to take the risk that they can't get the asset back that they loaned you money for. It's time consuming. The Mexican courts are notoriously slow, like many, I mean, courts everywhere in the world. So it is a big risk. Some banks tried it right when I first moved here. They were offering mortgages and quickly stopped. The costs were too high. The administrative costs were too high. Very recently, some companies have popped up that are offering less traditional mortgage loans to US and Canadian citizens buying in Mexico. They're very specific, but they might be worth checking out. We haven't had a buyer use them yet. One's called Moxie and one's like Global Expat Mortgage or something like that. You can Google it, yeah. And so we haven't had, and then there's one through a company called Title Solutions, which is actually a local one in Mexico. So they aren't super low interest rate, and they aren't as long-term as traditional mortgages, but for many people, they're in a position where they want to buy now before the market goes much higher. They maybe can't withdraw funds because they're going to get penalized from their retirement account. And so they need kind of a bridge loan to get the property until they can take the money out without being penalized. So for that kind of situation, I think this could be perfect if it's not too expensive. So that's kind of remains to be seen how that's going. But
My broker has said something to me about borrowing, instead of taking it out of the portfolio, borrowing against the portfolio. And I can do that for, I think it's 3.5%. I'm making 8 to 10% on the portfolio. So that makes, that gives me a gain, and plus access to tax-free money. You don't have to pay a penalty or anything for taking it out because it's a loan.
Yeah, and that's actually what most of our buyers do. Most buyers are borrowing against other assets or refinancing their mortgage or something, getting the cash out and buying here because the interest rates have been so nice.
Yeah,
so
they were.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yes, so that's another thing. So because of this difficulty in repossessing property that you've transferred possession of, sellers are very unlikely to finance you. So most people wouldn't carry a note. They wouldn't give you possession because same problem. They might not be able to get it back if you default on the note. It's not, I wouldn't call it financing, but if you're buying into a new project, you have more time to pay. They're still not going to give it to you before you've paid all of it. But if you get in early, you may have 2 years it takes them to build it and deliver it to make payments on it. Which isn't, I mean, usually it's no interest, which is nice, but not exactly financing because you're still not going to be able to use the property until you've paid in full. Okay, any questions about that? No. All right, so you're going to need cash. We use escrow accounts to handle transactions. So the ones that we use most often are located in the US. And so you would transfer an earnest money deposit into the US escrow account. At closing, they would distribute all of the money to the seller wherever they are. So sometimes the money never comes to Mexico, the purchase price, because the sellers are both from Canada, or they're both from US or Germany or anywhere. Their accounts don't have to be in Mexico. You never have to be in pesos if you don't want to be. Well, unless you have a Mexican seller or buyer. But the money can all be handled electronically. You don't need to have an account in Mexico. So that part has become much easier than it used to be. In some situations, you may run into a seller who will not agree to use escrow. They're very suspicious of escrow accounts in Mexico. It's not traditionally how they do business. And so it's kind of a learning curve that we have to work with them on. But in some situations, they just won't agree to it. So if that's the property you want, you may have to give them money directly, which, part of their dislike of escrow is that historically, when you bought property here, between two Mexican citizens, it's very quick. You give a little money to hold it, and then within like 10 days, you pay for the rest of it. All the contracts are done and due diligence and all that stuff. But when a foreigner is buying, we have to deal with that trust, and that takes time. So it's a little less fun for us to give a seller money and then have to wait. I mean, this last year, like 3 to 4 months until closing, and hope that the seller's going to show up to closing. It doesn't feel great to give the money, but that's, in some cases, our clients have had to do that, and it's worked out okay, but we don't love it. And so we always try to use escrow, and I would never tell anyone don't use escrow, because it's just the safest way to do it. Your money sits in escrow. The seller knows that you put it in. They have confidence that you have the money to complete the transaction, and you have the confidence that if something happens, you can get your money back. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay. In addition to the purchase price, you'll also be paying closing costs. In Mexico, buyers pay the closing costs, which is interesting, and I don't know why, because I guess it's just the custom. So the buyers pay the cost to transfer the title. The sellers have to pay for their own like certificates of no liens and all that kind of stuff, and they pay their capital gains and they pay the real estate commission, but the buyer's paying to transfer the property. Well, in another session, we're going to go over the actual buying process, and I can discuss that with you, but just so for these purposes, just suffice it to say that the buyer is going to pay a lawyer, they'll pay the notario, they're going to pay purchase acquisition taxes, they're going to pay to transfer the trust and the first year trust fee and some other registration costs. So that can add up. It's at the $100,000 price point, it's around, it's over 10% of the purchase price. At the $300,000 price point, it's around 8% of the purchase price. At the $1 million price point, it's down to like 6%. So some of those are just flat fees, and some are pegged to the purchase price. Certainly purchase acquisition taxes are pegged to the purchase price. So that is another, when you're trying to decide what kind of property you're looking for and what your budget is, you need to keep in mind that, it's not just the purchase price, there's just an additional chunk of money that will have to be paid before closing. And, it can raise your costs quite a bit. Any questions on that? That's all I have for tonight. I'm gonna open it up for questions. We did good, right before an hour.
And Kim, can you talk a little bit about the new construction that's going on and where? Is it all Portside and Colonia, or is it
It's
in?
everywhere. Yeah, there's a lot of projects Portside and in the Colonia, both. And they're typically smaller units, because now they've raised the density limits here, and so builders can put 3 units where they used to only be able to put 1. And so they're much smaller units.
Did they change the density also in some of the other communities that are being built, like along the 307?
No, those are lots, so they don't have multi-unit properties in those gated communities. And so they haven't, they still limit what you can build on your lot in terms of what you can cover, how much land you can cover. Anything else? Keith, do you want to tell us who our winner is of the 500 peso gift certificate to La Serena?
Yes. Do they still need to be in the chat to win? Is that the rule?
Okay,
No. They are. I'm just checking.
Okay.
They are. So it's good. So the winner of the gift certificate is Jenny.
Ah,
Who is it?
good for you. Yay,
Jenny.
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 Jenny, yay, Jenny.
I think it's rigged.
Jenny, if you can, we're gonna have to can you private message me your email and we'll send you the gift certificate? Or I don't know if you're here in Puerto Morelos. Jenny, are you happy? Tell us, Jenny. Jenny's not talking.
She's speechless.
Thank you guys so much. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have a few more minutes. Anyone?
No, thanks a lot. It's been very informative. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. And I wanted to tell you, we are going to continue to do the series. And then we also have a bunch of information on our website, which is runawayrealty.com, including a downloadable Puerto Morelos buyers brainstorming guide, which you might find really helpful. And there's a few other things on there.
Okay, thank you.
Anything you could want to know is on there.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Thanks for coming.